Welcome to the HMO Property Show by investors for investors. Brought to you by the HMO Property Co, Australia's leaders in impact investing. Investments made with the intention to generate a measurable, beneficial social or environmental impact alongside a positive financial return. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing.
Welcome back to the HMO Property Show. Today I've got a very special guest. It is the CEO of the UDIA, which is the Urban Development Institute of Australia. It's Mrs. Tanya Steinbeck.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
It really is a pleasure and a privilege to have you in here today. I know you're a very, very, very busy person at the minute.
Always busy, but I love having these kinds of conversations. I think, the ideas and sharing of information is really important.
There's a lot going on out there at the minute as well, isn't there?
Oh, just a bit, yeah. Certainly keeps us busy.
So what is the UDIA for people that don't know what it is?
So UDIA was formed in WA in 1973. So it's actually our 50th anniversary of existence this year, and close to in the other states as well. So it was basically formed in the early 70s by a group of land developers who were incredibly frustrated with dealing with various levels of government. And also wanting to, connect with each other and share information and learnings and ideas and things like that. Networking group, yeah. So that's how it started back in 73. And since then, it's kind of evolved. And obviously, Greenfields land development was a greater proportion, I suppose, of the housing provision that we have had over the last few decades. But over the last sort of 4.5 years that I've been in the role, there's been a very deliberate approach to broadening out our involvement, I guess, in terms of the types of development that we advocate for and get involved in particular, infill apartment, medium high density development, which is inevitably going to be a large part of how Perth in particular evolves over the next 50 years. So we've kind of pivoted, I guess, and become more all-encompassing, I guess, of all forms of housing development or residential development in particular. But we do get involved in sort of mixed-use precinct development and things like that as well. I guess we're a member-based organisation. Our primary members are developers of all sizes and shapes, and any company or organisation or even individual that is involved in the industry in any way, shape or form, engineers, planners, environmental consultants, sales agents, etc. So it's a pretty broad church, I guess, in terms of a membership base. But so 50 years we've been around and...
Party planned.
Yes, well, we're extending it out. It's like the party that never ends. So it's a 12-month-long celebration. So we had a celebration down in Bunker Bay, which we normally have our state conference in June, which was fantastic. So that was a good opportunity to get, and we brought all of our past presidents and older people that had been involved quite some time ago together, and that was really good. It was great to share memories of how the industry and the body itself has evolved over time. So, yeah.
And you've been in seat for 4.5 years.
4.5 years. Yeah.
So, and you've been in property since you left school? Because you worked for the likes of the Property Council of Australia, Stockland, Mirvac, the public communities.
Yeah.
Any that I've missed there?
No. So I was 17 when I joined the Property Council, and I think there was only 3 of us. Joe Lenzo was the executive director back then, and absolutely loved it. Was there for 7 years, and took on all sorts of extra roles as we grew, and all that sort of thing. And when it came time to leave, one of our committee members was running Stockland at the time, and said, "Hey, why don't you come over here and work for me?" Which I did, and then the rest is history, I guess. That
would have been a big change. We've gone from Property Council of Australia to Stockland.
It was, yeah, it was. And I think from a a career perspective, I really wanted to get that experience in working for a large sort of ASX listed company, and just to, I guess, have a more of a direct involvement and impact in delivering product on the ground. It was,
How big was Sophie's back then? Now, what sort of land were they delivering every year?
Ooh, good question. Back then they were predominantly almost exclusively in land from a resi perspective. And were tinkering with built form back then. We used to call it seed housing, and they'd build out sort of the entry street. But I think there must have been about 50 or 60 staff in WA back then. But I remember my role was as a marketing manager, and it was during the boom. So from a marketing perspective, we were just managing disappointment of people that missed out. We were managing people that wanted to camp out for a lot, and it was just unreal. Yeah, there was very little marketing required. It was that way.
Seeing this now, is this similar to what we're seeing now in the market?
No, very different. There was so much hype back then, but this time it's different. I think this time, I think the issues that we're facing in the construction market, in particular, the supply chain issues, skills shortages, that wasn't there back then. We were still able to deliver housing in a reasonable time frame. We can't do that at the moment. It's getting better. And so I think the perception and the concern in the market around the capacity of our residential construction sector to deliver in a reasonable time frame is still a real live issue that I hope over the next sort of 6 to 9 months, as we complete a lot of the stock from the building bonus, that will start to shift and we'll get back some normality.
Yeah, must be light at the end of the tunnel with all of that stuff now, is there?
Yeah, from what I'm hearing, yes. So I think, the snake that ate the wombat, so the snake's almost digested the wombat. So we're at the back end now of the finishing trades are still an issue, because we're kind of at the back end of the construction process. So, the large builders are, renegotiating rates with brickies and things like that now, because that part of it, the pressures come off. But unfortunately, as is the case when we have these sorts of volatile economic conditions, we're seeing a lot of smaller, less experienced builders go to the wall. And that's leaving, quite a number of people, struggling.
Yeah. You also touched on you're moving more into the sort of class 2 apartment buildings, working with a lot of developers in that space as well. There must be a lot of issues there as well, because a lot of projects just aren't stacking up at the minute, are they?
No, they're not. It's really, really difficult. I think it's still a combination of materials issues, but still skills shortages. But fundamentally, the house prices or the unit prices haven't caught up yet to the degree that they need to be able to make these types of projects viable.
Yep.
And so I think the state government have been incredibly responsive in one sense, of bringing in things like the off-the-plan duty rebate scheme from a purchasing perspective, and then the infrastructure development fund to sort of subsidise headworks for these projects in certain locations, which is fantastic. The unfortunate thing is they've kind of, on the other hand, then implemented, poorly thought through policy like the public open space, contribution policy, and how that impacts in an infill context versus a greenfield context is very different. And so UDIA, together with our industry body friends, PCA, HIA, etc., we've all gone out hard against that. And thankfully, the Minister has listened and sort of said, no, we're not going to support things that are going to make infill harder and more expensive. But that's just it's just another thing that is making life difficult.
Which is making property that's available on the market now more and more unaffordable to people because supply and demand fundamentals, there's not enough supply, there's so much demand out there at the minute. Is that where the fee is coming from as well? People, is it the fear of missing out that people have got, or is the fear of the project not getting finished, or the fear of the holding costs when it is finished?
From a developer's perspective, from an end consumer's perspective, look, I think it depends on the market that you are serving. So the downsizer market that, the Blackburns of the world are very active in, they've got a great reputation. They've got a good builder in multiplex, and they deliver high quality products. So I think the trust is there. Where it's problematic is in the middle, where it's not quite the high end luxury. It's the more affordable end of the market. Yeah. That's, from a density perspective, the projects that are incredibly hard to stack. Anything that's sort of above 3 stories, where you start to have to comply with fire and more NCC requirements, it then, just adds stuff. Just 1,000 cuts, So yeah, it's really challenging. I think a lot of developers at the moment are actively looking to develop townhouse medium density sites because they're the only ones that they can make work at the moment. There's plenty of apartment projects in the pipeline, but they just don't yet make sense financially. And it's a big risk. And I think a lot of people don't understand the risk that developers take in sort of delivering these projects. It's significant. And so anything that is a disincentive to that, they are likely to just wait until it's safer.
It's all about the numbers, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, yes, at the end of the day, yeah. I mean, unless you're a government entity, then yeah, absolutely. A developer operates just like any other business. They need to make money otherwise why would you be in business? Why would you be a developer?
I won't be for much longer, would you?
No, you also
have numbers.
Exactly right. They're really important.
Yeah. So there's 3 things I'd like to discuss today, and me and you sat down before this and we had a chat for 20 minutes, and I said we could probably talk for 2 or 3 hours because there's so much to talk about. So we'll touch on the medium density code. I did see one of your posts on LinkedIn about the State of the Nation Housing Report from NIFIC, which really connected with me because I've been talking about these stats for quite a while now, and it was good to see someone like yourself talking about this and NIFIC reporting on it. And then we'll talk about the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Framework, which is being introduced, because these 3 things together are again slopping. Slopping.
Well, you're up here, son.
Yeah. It means slowing and stopping output of housing, which is desperately needed right now.
Yeah.
So the medium density code, look, I am not fully across it right now because a lot of the stuff we're doing at the minute is just single housing. So my business partner and I made a decision 12 months ago to stop developing land because it was just getting too difficult to make it stack up. So we've purposely not really delved too far into the medium density code. But from what I understand, it's R30 to R60.
Correct. Yeah, R30. And so there's a lot of good stuff in the medium density code, and UDIA has been actively sort of pushing for a medium density code for years. And I think there's a lot of good stuff in it. The challenge is for some products, particularly in greenfields and land estates, where they are coded R30 under the MD, it's been very technical, under the R codes. It's problematic in that some of the new rules around the lot widths and setbacks and other things mean that, for example, a very popular product is the 12.5 metre 2-story product, which you would have seen all throughout Perth in different forms. That's a super popular product. It fits a particular price point that is effectively unable to be delivered under the new code. So what we're working with the state government with now is how do we sort of allow that product to continue to be offered in a way that meets the principles of the medium density code. The why, why are we doing this? What outcome are we trying to achieve? And fundamentally, the MD code was trying to address a lot of the really poor, battle axe kind subdivisions that you would get with very little regard to, solar access, ventilation, trees, functional living spaces, and streetscapes also.
Yeah.
So the intent of the code is very positive.
Yeah.
The challenge is that we are applying it in a one-size-fits-all environment. And initially, R30 single res was not part of the MD code. That was always, a position that we supported. It's now not the case. It is captured by it. And so that's kind of our issue that we're working through at the moment is how do we come to a happy medium where you get the outcome you are wanting, but industry is not prevented in delivering a very affordable product that works. And so, yeah, it's good. The intent is good. There's a few issues that we're still working through just to make sure that people still have access to that housing choice and that price point that has proven to be so popular over the last few years.
Yeah. So with some of the changes that we're seeing, what are the problems that have come out of these changes? Or what are the, not problems, what are the challenges that developers are facing now to make development stack up?
Well, it's probably, from a development perspective, it's more those developers that undertake the delivery of built form themselves. So, a Stockland, for example, would build out, X number of townhouses in a particular cell within a subdivision. And they've been doing that largely using local development plans because they provide more flexibility from a planning perspective in terms of what you're able to deliver. And I guess the good thing about the medium density code is that you can continue to use a local development plan when you can't strictly comply with all of the requirements of the medium density code. So it's probably not necessarily a huge issue for developers that aren't building out their developments. However, depending on the density of the development they're doing, the solar orientation becomes incredibly important under the new medium density code.
Yeah.
And whilst it's just going to take time and effort in looking at how you can accommodate the new changes, and the government's provided an extended transition period, particularly for greenfields developers, to be able to work through those issues. So I think the transition is really important, and just the timing. So thankfully, the government have been very accommodating in not forcing something on the industry when they are just struggling just to catch up with meeting the demand they've already got.
Yeah. What about the infill developers then? What about the mum and dad investors that might buy a 728 square metre triple X block, and they might try and subdivide that and put three bed single story houses on there? The new medium density code makes that a little bit more difficult, from what I understand, from a brief read that I've had of it. Smaller footprints of houses, because we now need a deep soil retention zone for trees that need a certain size tree canopy. And because we're making the footprint of the house smaller, that means we need to go double story, which then pushes up the price of the construction component, which then pushes up the price of the end sale component, which makes it unaffordable.
Yes, it does. And, one of the things that we highlighted throughout this sort of consultation period, and when the department was doing financial modelling on the outcome of the code, is that particularly for, the 12.5 metre sort of wide lots, you lose a bedroom. And so the implication of losing a bedroom is not just, I guess, the purchase price itself or the amenity the living space that the person has, it's the valuation. So the valuation then is problematic because you're valuing a property with one less bedroom, when realistically you could get the fourth, right? Or that's what they've been doing historically. So it does have valuation implications, which has finance implications, and there's a lot of differing factors. It's really complex when you get into it. But as with a lot of things, in terms of government legislation and policy. It's not until you go to implement it that you start to work out what the problems are. And so I like to think that this government is adaptive and responsive. And so as industry starts to realise some of the problems, and as long as they are problems that are so significant that they do have an impact on the consumer, then the government will listen. So there's a fine balance between forcing innovation and then impacting people's livelihoods.
Yeah.
And I think that's a delicate balance that we're trying to find at the moment.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's like you say, it's probably the wrong time to be trying to work it out with the supply that's required in the market. But it kind of leads us on nicely to the report from NIFIC as well, because you said there that the one thing they could do is build it smaller so there's one less bedroom. The problem is we've been building houses that are so big for so long. One thing that isn't noted in there, which kind of a stat that I know, there's over 12 million empty bedrooms in Australia because we've been building like 3, 4, 5 bedroom houses. And it says in the NIFIC report, over 80% of Perth's housing stock is made up of 3 to 5 bedroom houses. And we are in well short of where we need to be, producing 1 and 2 bedroom houses. Now, it's obvious that we need the 1 and 2 bedroom houses, but we can't make them stack up because the building is stack up, which means we might make it by the block cheaper, and then the building. It's not easy. It's not easy.
It's really not. No, it's not. And I think there are so many factors that have brought us to where we are today around the makeup of our housing and it being large. I mean, it's the great Australian dream, right? To have, a 4x2 on a, 700-800 square metre block, and we don't see those anymore. Backyard, plenty of room for kids to play, swimming pool, etc. The reality is that we can't continue down that path if we want to accommodate the population growth that we're anticipating through migration and other means. So we've got to change. And how we go about that, I think, is... it's really difficult because it's almost a cultural shift, right? And COVID didn't help. I think the COVID almost sent people back into their homes. Well, they had to, they were forced to, for a certain period, not so long in Perth, but definitely in other states. And so the house became so much more important than what it had ever been because you were stuck there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you start to notice when you don't have enough space or when you're working from home. Now, working from home is not going away. And how do we need to set up our homes to accommodate working from home practically? That's a shift that I don't think is going to ever go back to the way things were. So how do we need to accommodate that in how we design the houses of the future?
Yep.
And I think the other sort of challenge is that we don't talk about very much is the transition between housing types as your life circumstances change, because you don't always need a 4x2. You need it while you are having kids, perhaps, but when your kids get a certain age, you don't need a 4x2 anymore. So how, we need to make it really easy for people to transition between different types of housing as their needs change. But at the moment, we make that very expensive and difficult.
Yes.
And so we are disincentivizing people from right-sizing in a lot of ways. So that's another factor that we need to look at. So, it's a real challenge.
It is.
Yeah.
The challenge. You mentioned there the great Australian dream of owning the 700 square metre block, the 4x2 with a pool. Do you think that dream's changing as the cultural shift, but also the age shift that's coming through now? Is it the Gen Ys or the Gen Z? I always get them mixed up, but they're now the biggest generation per populace right now in Australia, and they're the way they want to live compared to the way our parents wanted to live. It's totally different, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But again, I think there's still going to be a requirement for different housing types as you get older, just by nature of how our lives evolve, and we have families and we need more space. So I think what we are seeing, particularly in the younger generation, is the emphasis particularly on sustainability and affordability, not just upfront, but ongoing affordability from a living cost, cost of living crisis. Everyone's talking about it. The number of first home owner or first home buyer grant applications has gone through the floor in WA over the last couple of quarters because interest rates are going up. So their lending capacity is significantly reduced. There's also a lack of supply, lack of choice, lack of confidence in the market as well at the moment, particularly in new housing. So it's really difficult. They're living with mum and dad probably far longer than they want to, and those that would like to rent can't because there is a, ridiculously low vacancy rate of 0.6%. There's no choice. There is nowhere to rent, and if you can afford, if you find something, it's so expensive at the moment that it's making it very, very difficult for younger people that are wanting to move out and get their own space.
Yeah. Yep. I'm going to plug my company because obviously the rooms that we create, it's not the answer, but it's part of the solution. When you look at, do you know Ian Shields from Home Hub?
Yes.
Yeah. So I had Ian on a couple of weeks back. We spoke about the housing continuum and what is required, and very similar answer to what you said. There's no straight answer. We just need more housing, and we need more diversity of housing as well. And I just feel like ours kind of slots nicely in between social and affordable housing and the private rental market, because that's where that gap is. And just said there, where the younger generation is just going to be with mum and dad for a lot longer, aren't they?
They are. And I think, co-living is something that, we probably moved away from during COVID just because of, the pandemic and the health implications. But as we move out of that and the realities of what you can afford really hit home, then co-living, particularly for young single people, it's a great option. It's a great option. Doesn't matter how old you are. If you're on your own, great option.
Yeah, it is. We've got 18 to 74-year-olds renting our rooms. So
yeah, amazing. And it's also the other end of the spectrum from an age perspective too, because one of the greatest housing need is for older single women. Yep. Divorced or separated, and don't have a lot of equity or assets. They're a huge part of the market, and how are we accommodating them? Not very well at the moment, because we don't have a lot of 1 and 2 bedroom homes that are affordable and attainable for those people.
My wife is doing quite a bit of work in that space now. So since she had little baby Freddie, she's more stepped into a BDM role, and she's been out there with all the not-for-profits and trying to get access, or trying to let people know that we exist so that we can provide housing for them, because we know there's a massive need out there for it. It's just finding them people and making them understand what we do and how we do it. And we actually did some work with Zon House.
Oh, fantastic.
Just before we went back to the UK, so probably about 6-7 weeks ago. First house out, first family escaping domestic violence.
Oh,
so I boarded the plane with a big smile out of this.
I bet you did. What a great outcome. And, on a personal level, my husband is in the police force, and he heads up the family domestic violence component for police. And so that's something that personally very, very interested in, how do we provide safe accommodation for families that are experiencing those challenges.
Yeah. No, that's the whole other topic for the weekend. Back to the stats on the NIFIC report. So it says, taking into account the new net annual dwelling supply and new net annual household formation for Perth, we're going to be 18,300 dwellings short over the next 5 years.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. And so UDIA over the last 6 to 9 months have been working on a project that will be rolled out nationally called the Development Ready Pipeline. And that project is particularly focused on exactly what it says. What is the development ready land that is available in Perth and Peel over the next 1 to 15 years? And what is constraining either the industry or the not-for-profit or government's ability to deliver housing on that land. And I think we've mapped out 17 or 18 different layers of constraints geospatially over the Metropolitan Region Scheme, which is, the basic planning footprint for Perth and Peel, to look at realistically, even though it may be zoned urban now or urban deferred or even, planning investigation, how much of that is actually practically able to be delivered when you overlay things like environmental approvals or, infrastructure constraints or, other bits and pieces. Land fragmentation is one of the biggest issues that we are facing as a development sector in the provision of housing, because all the easy land is gone, right? If it was easy, it would have been done by now. And there's a lot of people that want to hold on to their land holding for obvious reasons, right? And they're holding out for the best deal. And so it's incredibly complicated when you are trying to bring together a decent sized land parcel, when you're dealing with multiple landowners that have differing motivations and positions in their lives. And that's a huge component of why, we're facing, a real challenge in facilitating supply.
Yeah. And then at the same time, we're trying to stop urban sprawl and to have a bit more infill as well. So just a few more curveballs to throw in.
Yeah. And I'm all for a balance, right? I don't think you can rule out the need for greenfields development for exclusive infill. It's just not practical. Yeah. So there needs to be a balance, and it's just about, how we get that right.
Well, another really good stat as well. In WA, 29,800 people are identified as in housing need. 26,200 of those are in rental stress, and 3,600 of them are homeless. It's pretty alarming figures, considering we're supposed to be a lucky country as well. There's lots of people want to move to this country because, they see it as a good place to live, but them stats there are quite alarming. The social housing waiting list as well is also got a lot of people waiting on there too.
Yeah.
And then I was talking to Ian Shields the other week on the podcast that we did, and he said there's a lot of people there as well that they can't actually capture in that homeless category number because they can't physically track them.
Yes.
So while they've got a statistic, they think it's 3 to 4, maybe 5 times the size of that.
Yes. And I think the reality is with the social housing wait list is that there's 2 wait lists, right? So there's the priority wait list and there's the wait list. And so by virtue of just the volume of new social housing we can provide, it's very rare that you would get anywhere beyond housing people on the priority wait list, because there's just not the volume of stock to be able to offer. And a lot of the challenge, and particularly when we talk to the Minister for Housing about it, is a lot of the time properties are offered to tenants and they choose not to take them for a whole range of reasons. And so there's a bit of a give and take there too. If people are going to be very selective, then they have to acknowledge that it's going to take way longer to get a property. But ideally, we'd be supporting people that have the capacity to be able to house, the financial capacity or means to be able to house themselves in the private sector, to provide them with the support to get them to that point.
Yeah.
So that they don't need to rely on social housing.
Yeah. And Minister Carey's actually pumping quite a lot of money into social housing as well, isn't he?
Yeah.
Do we know what's coming through the pipeline in the way of housing?
Yeah, so I think overall the commitment was for 3,300 houses as part of their $750 million in investment. So I think they've already delivered just over 1,000 of those. 1,100 or so, the latest I heard. And I think the challenge that for the minister and for the government at the moment is the same challenge everyone else is facing, that we can't, there's limited capacity in the construction market to be able to deliver new housing. And so the government's been looking at alternative forms of construction, which UDIA was sort of a big advocate for going back 3 years. We did a big research piece on modern methods of construction and the benefits of frame construction versus the traditional double brick and tile that we've seen here forever.
Yep.
And one of the key advantages is speed. And so the government's recognised that, and they're doing a lot of modular and frame construction now because out of necessity, really. So they're doing a lot of that, but they're also doing a lot of spot purchasing. And as sort of chatting before, that's just robbing Peter to pay Paul in terms of total housing supply. So spot purchasing properties is just taking that out of the market that would otherwise properties that would otherwise be available for someone else to buy.
And so they're just private.
Yep.
Properties off the private market, off the private
market,
and providing social housing.
Correct.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and that's always been the case to a certain degree, because the reality is sometimes you cannot get the type of housing that you require, by building it brand new. So you do need to spot purchase houses and that's been going on for a long time. The challenge at the moment is that the percentage of what's being purchased as spot purchasing in the established market is higher than what it would otherwise been because they can't build quick enough.
Yep. Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily adding to supply. It's robbing Peter to pay Paul. Yep.
Okay. You touched on construction methodologies there, double brick. God, I can't do it. Double brick versus steel frame. And we get a lot of questions from our clients like, what's more beneficial, what's better, what's not. East Coast clients don't seem to mind as much, but the West Coast clients, we are addicted to double brick. And we do have a few West Coast clients that are building the steel frames at the minute. Thank you. What were the findings that came out of the report with the two different methodologies?
Yeah, well, look, I think, and the timing of which we did the report too, we were, even more in the infancy of that component of the market. So the cost benefit wasn't necessarily there to the degree that you'd like it to be to make a choice if it was purely just on cost. Because we didn't have the volume to be able, or the volume or the market capacity to be able to produce framed construction or modular housing at the degree that we needed it to be to get that scale and cost benefit. The benefit was absolutely in the time frame. We're now building houses in factories and just carting them onto site. It's just phenomenal. And looking through a finished house, unless you knock on the walls, which some of our older generations still like to knock on the walls, you wouldn't know the difference. And in fact, the adaptability of frame construction is far superior to double brick construction. So I guess when we're talking about the need to adapt our housing over time as our needs change, well, it's far easier to do that in a framed construction than it is in double brick. So there's a lot of benefits. I think there's always going to be the role for brick and tile here because it's it's just the way we do things in WA. But I think that as we get more sophisticated and we have more players in that side of the market, I think it will become a far bigger part of housing construction than what it has been.
Yeah. We went out and visited a few modular home builders as well, and you spoke about you go inside a timber frame or a steel frame house compared to a brick, you can't tell the difference. Some of the modular stuff that's coming out of the factories at the minute is incredible.
Yeah,
incredible. Like you literally can't even tell it's a modular house when you stand outside it or when you go inside it.
No, you can't. Not even get started on 3D printing technology and AI and the impact that those things are going to have on how we deliver housing in the future. Like the reality is that we actually had an urban futurist speak at our conference in June, and it was scary. He made a really good point that, we will end up being able to deliver entire buildings and houses in days where it takes, 6 to 12 months to get an approval. It just makes the approval process look ridiculous, even more so than it already is. So I think the impact of technology on this sector is going to be significant, and it's going to happen quicker than what people think.
Yeah. I also had a lady on my other podcast that I used to run previously. She owned a company called Money Catcher, and they were setting up a system so that someone could go to a property and purchase it within a day, and they'd do finance application and settlement within a day, and you could be in the property the next day. Yeah, so there's a lot changing in the background.
Well, that's a dream at the moment, isn't it? Imagine that. It's so far from our reality at the moment, the mind bubbles, but what an amazing concept.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's coming out. Lastly, let's talk about the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Framework. It's a bit of a tongue twister, that one.
It is.
On the day that I haven't.
PCH.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it? Because apart from being a tongue twister, what is this? And when did it come out? I was on holiday and someone sent me a WhatsApp message. You said, have you heard about this? And next thing you know, it was there.
Yeah, so I guess, the point, the fundamental point is that it has always been illegal to damage Aboriginal cultural heritage, always. The previous act from 1972, I believe, it was always illegal, and it is still illegal. And so, developers historically, if there was identified cultural heritage on a site, they would require a Section 18 clearance under the previous act, right? So that hasn't changed. What has changed, and what I think has created a lot of controversy, is the broad applicability of the legislation. So now it affects anyone with a land holding 1,100 square metres or more across Western Australia. So it captures a lot more than the previous act did. The other two key changes, I think, that make it challenging to navigate is the inclusion of intangible cultural heritage. So tangible cultural heritage is something that can be surveyed for. There's specific sites or, landform or water forms or other things that are identified as having cultural significance. You can see it,
yeah,
right? And you can feel it and you can go, right, well, I can develop around it, or, I can incorporate that into the design, and it's easier to mitigate the risk of harm to that. When we're talking about intangible heritage, which we aren't able to consistently define because it's intangible, and it is up to the knowledge holder or the traditional owners to define what the cultural significance is of that particular site or activity area, as they call it. And so how do you mitigate against an intangible heritage component? And so that leads into the third big change, which is the decision maker or approval authority is now the traditional owners. It wasn't before. It was the department. So that's the big change. So you have to now undertake a due diligence assessment for any land that is over 1,100 square metres in Western Australia. And that process itself is more complicated than it used to be, and does require, in most circumstances, engagement with knowledge holders or the traditional owners. So identifying who they are, how can I get hold of them? How do I consult with them? So there's a whole range of guidelines and things that's been produced. But I think the challenge that we are facing is that the guidelines, regulations, and which we rely on as an industry, were only released in April for a 1 July implementation. And so it's rushed, and the key decision-making body, which is the local Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Services, under the legislation, the decision-making bodies. However, the legislation doesn't require them to be operational for the legislation to work. So if they aren't operational, which they aren't, there's 3 at the moment, that means that you have to consult with the prescribed body corporate or the native title body that, has that interest in that particular land holding. And so, it's there's exemptions for the vast majority of people. If you've just got a house in Perth, that's under 1,100, it's of no issue to you. If you want to put a pool in, or you want to replace a boundary fence, or you want to do those sorts of typical activities, put a patio in, it's exempt, right? So the vast majority of the general public should not be unless you've got a larger land holding.
Yeah.
And like for like, means that the activities you did before, you can still do.
So you're taking a pool out to put a pool in.
Yeah, as long as it's the same,
Yeah.
height, depth.
And we talk based on 1,100 square metres on big end.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But if you've got a lot of land that's larger than 1,100 square metres and you want to put a new fence in, or a pool, or a retaining wall, or reticulation maybe, how deep can we dig? Is it 500 mil?
Good question. Don't have it in front of me. Not very far.
Yeah, I've heard it.
Not very far.
500 mil deep.
Yeah, it's highly prescriptive unless you're exempt or you can prove that it's a like-for-like activity. And there's a whole range of resources on the department website that sort of attempts to assist in answering those questions. But I think what has unfortunately happened is the timing of this legislation also happens to be being implemented when the entire country is debating the voice to Parliament. And what I've observed in the media is, and politically, is people trying to connect the two. Like, if this legislation is a failure, therefore this is a pretty good indication that the voice will be a failure. They're two very different things, but have been tied together by many.
Yep.
And so it's really unfortunate, I think. I think nobody will argue that it is, incredibly important to not damage Aboriginal cultural heritage. We all agree, though, how we get to that point and how we work together is where the issues are coming up. So I am on the Minister appointed an implementation group, and I'm sitting on that with a number of other industries from farming and agriculture and native title bodies. And we will be working with the government on the issues that are currently facing, our respective members and the general public and what needs to change. And I think it's important to remember that it can change. We can change it. But we can't change it to the extent that it loses its intent.
Yeah.
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 So I think we've just got to all take a big deep breath and work through the issues. Could it have been done better? Could we have had more time? Absolutely. But we are where we are. So we just need to work through the issues.
Yeah. I think a lot of people that listen to this podcast won't realise the impact that the UDIA have had over the years since it's been in operation in the landscape that we have right now. You probably just take a lot of it for granted. But as I'm listening to you talk and, you're consulting and advocating on a lot of these things that are going on out there, the UDIA and yourself in particular would have had a lot of impact on the way that we see certain things right now.
Yeah, well, it depends who you talk to. Those who have been around a very long time will just say, oh, it's only getting worse. So I always like to think that we've held back the tide somewhat. And interestingly, I was talking to one of our members who have been around a very long time in this industry, and they developed a very popular land estate many, many years ago in Canning Vale. And it's a beautiful estate. It's a beautiful place for people to call home. Back then, the subdivision application had 5 conditions on it. If you were to do that today, between 40 and 50 conditions, depending on, where you are and what the constraints are, my question is, how significantly better is the outcome today with 50 conditions than it was back then with 5?
Yeah.
I don't think that we would see a sufficient tangible improvement to warrant the amount of red tape, regulation, policy that we now have to jump through as an industry. I don't think the person that lives in that estate in Canning Vale is any worse off than the people that buy in Aberley or Ellenbrook or anywhere else today.
Yeah.
So I think we've just got to keep that in mind when we are creating government policy or amending existing government policy, that we do so with a housing affordability lens with everything we do. And not necessarily just planning policy either. a lot of other policies that impact housing affordability that housing is just not considered, a regulatory impact from a government perspective.
Lots to take in. I think there's so much. Yeah, look, I really appreciate coming to the podcast today. It's been really good catching up. There's so many of these topics we could have really dug into, but we've been speaking for 50 minutes already.
Wow. Yeah, that went quick.
Flies like, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Time flies. Yeah, before. If I pick some more topics out, can you come back on?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll talk for hours.
If anybody's in the property real estate game and I want to join UDIA, how do they do it?
Look, we'd be happy to have you come on board. They just need to go to the website udiawa.com.au or give us a call. And we'd be more than happy to have you join the UDIA family. That would be amazing.
And you throw some pretty good events as well. I mean, you've got the Awards for Excellence coming up soon.
Yes, we do.
Yep.
Yes. And the awards have been around a very long time. They're well regarded by consumers, which I think is the ultimate, judge. We do a lot of events, a lot of professional development and training and keeping people up to date with how they comply with things like the Cultural Heritage Framework and the Medium Density Code and all of these things that will impact your ability to deliver housing. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're thinking of joining, just imagine the networking that you're going to be able to do in there with the people that you're going to meet that are already in the game, consultants, developers, builders, like the people. How many members have you got?
So we have company members majority. So we've got 300 companies.
Yep.
But our reach is sort of between 10 and 12,000.
Wow.
Within that membership base and stakeholders, etc. So it's a huge network. And the reason why I love this industry and I love what I do is the people. The people that are in this industry are amazing. They have the best of intentions, that's why I call it a family, because it really is like that. I don't know what it's like on the East Coast. Maybe it's a little bit more competitive than here, but our developer members can sit in a room, and have a beer and share frustrations and things like that. And that's what it's all about, right? It's like we're all in this together, and I think that's what sets UDIA apart from other industry bodies, in my view. Is it's not so much what we do, it's how we do it. Yeah.
One team, one dream.
Yeah. Exactly.
Tanya, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you stay up to date with all the cash flow positive property updates.